small changes that can make a huge difference to our lives. We often think if we want to make an impact, if we want to make a difference in the places where we are, if we want our lives to be lives that are full and lives that count, we sometimes think it's all about the big things. They're the people that do amazing stuff. And that stuff's great. The people that sort of go somewhere and be a missionary, or the people that start something fantastic. And those things are brilliant. And I'm certain there's people in this room or people online who are going to start some amazing things. But actually, living a full life, being the person you are made to be, making a difference to those around you, being someone who's living the abundant life that the Bible talks about, is actually more about small changes. It's more about doing small things consistently. And Kath spoke brilliantly last week about thankfulness, about how being thankful shifts what we do. It shifts our approach to things. It shifts our lives and the lives of people around us. And today I want to talk a little bit about honor. Turn to the person next to you and mouth the word honor. You can actually, that doesn't work, does it? You can't see them. You can just not mouth it because you're all wearing masks. Just look at them anyway. Give them a wink, the person next to you. Give them a little wink. And we're talking about honor. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you feel like you've been overlooked, where people have missed who you are and what you bring to the party. Maybe in work, maybe even in your family, maybe in school. You've been in a place where you've been overlooked and underestimated. And actually, if that happens long enough, you sometimes start to believe that actually you are less than you thought. That shift can happen. Or the other side is if you think about a moment when someone has believed in you more than you believe in yourself. So where someone's seen who you can be and not got stuck on who you are. Where someone's seen who God's made you to be, even though that isn't how you look right now. If someone's called something out of you that has even surprised you that they believed it was there. When someone's honored you like that, that also changes things, doesn't it? When someone has belief and faith and hope in you that you haven't seen yourself, something shifts, something changes when we honor. And we're in, for these few weeks, we're in a book in the Bible called 1 Thessalonians. Now, 1 Thessalonians is a letter. Lots of the New Testament is letters written by a guy called Paul to a church in a place called Thessalonica. Hence why they're called the Thessalonians. Like if you're writing to the people in Swindon, it would be called 1 Swindonians. But it wasn't written to us, but it still has great stuff for us. It was written to these guys in Thessalonica, and they've been Christians for not a very long time. So Paul, the guy who wrote the letter, he told them all about Jesus. He taught them, but we reckon he'd only actually been with them for just a few weeks. And then he had to go. We're told in the book of Acts that he was sort of run out of town. And this letter, 1 Thessalonians, is Paul writing to this community who are quite new, who've still got things to learn, who are still getting things wrong. And you read a bit later in the letter some of the things that he's correcting them about, things that they haven't quite understood, and a few bits of behaviour that need to change. That's who he's writing to. And it's a great letter, actually. In fact, I'd encourage all of you to read 1 Thessalonians. It's only 5 chapters. It'll take you about 10 minutes. You should all read it before next week. That's your homework. It's a great letter. It's encouraging these guys to keep going, to keep your eyes on Jesus, to live like eternity's a real thing, to not sweat the small stuff. And really, it's like a sort of pep talk. Like, go for it, guys. That's the book. And what Paul writes. So you've got these guys who are new, who are still getting things wrong, who don't understand everything. And he opens at the second 2 verses. Here it is, 1 Thessalonians 1, chapter 2 and 3, verses 2 and 3. It says, "We always thank God for you all, and always mention you in our prayers. For we remember before God our Father how you put your faith into practice, how your love made you work so hard, and how your hope in our Lord Jesus Christ is firm." That's a nice way to start a letter, isn't it? Anyone got any nice emails or letters during lockdown that start like that? I always thank God whenever I think of you. I'm amazed by your love, by your faith, by your hope. It's quite an honouring way to start, isn't it? Despite the fact that these guys have still got a lot to learn, despite the fact that these guys are still getting things wrong, despite the fact these guys are brand new to this is how Paul starts. I always thank God for you. I'm amazed by your hope, your faith, your love. You guys are doing great. He doesn't get stuck on the stuff they're getting wrong. He honors. He celebrates. And what I'd love us to think about for sort of 10 minutes together is what might it look like if we were a community who honored each other, if we were a community who celebrated each other, if we as church here in Swindon, we were people who called out what God sees in people and didn't get stuck, didn't sort of trip over the things that people aren't quite yet. Like the power of honor. There was a study by YouGov in May, and it said that 60% of key workers now feel appreciated. It was about 30% before. There's a new appreciation. And actually one of the gifts of lockdown is that people have seen that some of the most essential and important people in our society are the ones who are paid the least. And and it's not that the ones who get lots of money aren't important, but there's been a shift, a new sense of honor, a new sense of celebration. And actually, that's, I'd say, one of the positive things that's come out of COVID and lockdown is a new sense of honor. And I'd say that's actually like a godly thing. That's a kingdom thing. And as we move into this new normal, that's something that I'd love us, as the church, as God's people here in Swindon, I'd love us to keep going with. To be people who honor, to be people who celebrate, to be people who see people as God sees them. And that's what Paul does here. He says, I'm so thankful for you. I thank God every time I think of you. I love your faith. I love your hope. I love what you guys are doing. And honor actually lifts people up. Honor invites people to be more than they realize they could be. And that's what honor is. It's seeing who people are without getting stuck over who they're not. It's about seeing who people are without tripping over who they're not quite yet. Seeing who God's made people to be. And a strange little sort of phenomenon that we're experiencing at the moment is this thing, we call it cancel culture. And it's this idea that if people say one terrible thing or something that I disagree with or something that sort of clashes with the way I see things, then that person should be cancelled from everything. Everything they offer is now no longer worth listening to or no longer paying attention to. They are cancelled. Now, it's absolutely right that we critique people. If people say horrible things that are damaging, then absolutely we need to hold them to account. But there's something about cancel culture that I'd love us to almost like flip it around in the church. Honor culture. Like, yes, they've got this thing very wrong right now, but there is more to them than that. There's something inside of them that is good, that God's put there. And when we go through the scriptures, we see this again and again and again and again, where people who really should be cancelled actually go on to do amazing things. Like you read about Moses in the Old Testament, and Moses actually killed someone. He murdered someone in anger, but still God says, you, Moses, are the perfect person to lead my people and set them free. Or Gideon in the book of Judges, when God meets him, Gideon says, listen, I'm no use to you because I'm the weakest member of the weakest family in the weakest clan and the weakest tribe. That's what he says. But God says, no, Gideon, you are a mighty warrior. That's who you are. I'm not going to get tripped over who you're not quite yet. That's who you are. And he honors him. And Gideon goes on to do amazing things. Or we sang about Esther in our song earlier. She was an orphan, and she thought the only thing that was going for her was that she was pretty. But actually, she was an amazing leader who was going to use her position to save God's people. And again, in the New Testament, Peter, if he's one of the disciples of Jesus, and he says the wrong thing all the time. But when God meets this guy, his name was Simon at the time, and he said, I'm going to rename you Cephas. He said, what name? Peter. And Cephas, anyone know what Cephas means? It means rock. He says to this person who is flaky and a big mouth and speaks before he thinks and gets things wrong and talks up everything, they say, no, Peter, you're going to be a rock. And actually, he is. We read later that Peter went on to be a rock in the early church. So much so that when he was killed for being a Christian, the tradition tells us, he said he couldn't have his cross the same way up as Jesus. He wanted it to be upside down. He was a rock. Jesus honored him, and it elevated him. And there's something that shifts when we honor people. And the question is, what if we treated people how God sees them? What if we treated people how God sees them? One more little Bible rant, and then I'll give you guys something to do. Genesis 1. Do you know what it says? It says that you are made in the image of God, is what Genesis 1 teaches us. So what does that mean? Think that one through. That means that every person in here shows us something of who God is. Every person in our town shows us something of who God is. If we can see past the rubbish and get to it. Because we're made in the image of God. Psalm 139 says that you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That's what the Bible says about people. Ephesians chapter 2, it says we are his handiwork, created to do good works. That when God looks at us, he sees us with great honor. When God looks at you, when God looks at each one of us, he sees us with great honor and with great delight as amazing people who have a contribution to make. And it's our job as the church to call that out of people. It's our job to treat people like this. Imagine what it would look like if we treated people how God sees them. And that's what Paul does. At the start of Thessalonians, he says, I thank God for you. Every time I think of you, I thank God. Your faith, your love that you show. I thank God for you. So I want to get you guys to do a little exercise to help make this personal. So and join in if you're watching at home. So I need you to grab out like either your phone or a pen and paper if you're a pen and paper person, or if you're not getting you can do it in your head. That's fine. But I'd love you to be able to make a little list for me, right? And what I need you to do is I need you to think, as all of us at home as well, I need you to think about someone in your life who is difficult. Someone in your life who is hard to be around. Someone in your life who, if you were put in a Zoom breakout room, you would sigh. Someone in your life who you do not look forward to seeing. Just think about someone. And if you're so nice you can't think of a person, which may be the case for some of you, I know, think about a politician or a group of people, someone you find difficult, okay? Everyone got one? Give me a little nod. Brilliant, no one nodding, fantastic. So, think about that person, and I want you to write down 5 words that describe them. Why have you picked that person as someone who is difficult in your life? Just write down in front of you 5 words that describe that person. Why you picked them as someone who's difficult, you wouldn't want to be on a Zoom call with. Okay, I'm going to be quiet. But so write them down. Join in if you're watching online. Write 5 things about that person. Go through. So 5 things about that person, 5 almost reasons why you've written them down on your list that make them difficult to be around. What you think of when you think of them. Just sort of wave at me when you're done your 5. We're getting there. I'll give you like 30 more seconds to think of 2 more words. You can decide whether or not to write the name at the top. Yeah, okay. So when I think of that person, that's what I think of. My words include arrogant, rude, lazy. irresponsible and unpleasant. That's my description of this person. And it's none of you, or you, I promise. Actually, I suppose you might be watching. You never know. Now, just pause for a minute. And I'd love you to ask the Lord, what do you see, God, when you look at this person? Okay? Just take a moment of quiet. Now, maybe you've never sort of feel like you've heard from God in your life before, but just pause for a minute. When God looks at this person, what does he see? What do you see, God? What's underneath all that stuff I've written? When you look at this person, what do you see, God? And I want you to write down 5 words of how does God see them? Who's God made them to be? Go for it. Yeah, so 5 things. What does God see when he looks at this person? I'll give you like another 20 seconds. What does God see when he looks at this person? And this is actually an exercise you can do with anyone or any group or any, like, actually, God, what do you see? Okay, we're pretty much there. And my question really is, imagine if you treated them like the second list, not the first list. Imagine how your posture might change in that relationship if you treated them like how God sees them, rather than how they kind of are right now. Imagine how that relationship might twist. Imagine what you might expect of them. Imagine how you might approach your next moment with them if you were treating them like the second list, not the first list. Like how God sees them, not like the way they've irritated, upset, or hurt you. Now, in some situations, there needs to be safe things in place. But just think for a moment, what might shift for me if I treated them like that second list, like someone who's hardworking and kind, who does good, who's fun, like someone who's hurting. That was on my list. But the list in front of you, just go there with me for a minute to the next time you're with them. And you treat them like that. You treat them like actually they've got something to bring. Like actually there's gold inside of them. Like actually the world's going to be better when we call that out. How might that shift your relationships? What might you need to do differently? And then just think for me about a number of relationships. And for us as God's people, you know, Jesus tells us that we are the light of the world, that we're called to shine. And here's one of the ways that we can shine, people. When we honor people, when we treat them the way God's made them, not stumbling over who they're not quite yet. Something would shift, wouldn't it? You know, what's God stirring up in you right now? We did this a little bit earlier in the week with our staff team, and someone was saying, actually, I feel like I need to, he used the word repent. I need to say sorry, actually, to God, because I've let my hurt and my offense and my pride stop me from loving this person and treating them how God made them. Maybe you need to send a little text and say, I really want to thank you for the way you've done that. Maybe something needs to shift. I remember when I was a teenager, I used to lead worship like Kath did this morning, like Tim does, and I used to lead the worship like the singing in our youth group, and I remember really vividly on the way to my friend Brad, who ran the worship team at our church, probably fairly similar size to Patton Church, maybe slightly bigger. And I remember him at the front door and talking to me and my mum, so I would have been 15 at the time. And I remember Brad saying to my mum, actually, we really want Joel to lead worship in this church. I think he could be really significant for the worship life, for our faith at this church. Now, I was a 15-year-old. My dad had died just only a few months before. I had so many insecurities, so much stuff I was working through. Even with the worship leading, yes, I wanted people to see Jesus, but I also sort of wanted them to see me too. There was mixed motives. I was really all over the place. But despite all of that, my insecurities and my issues and my mixed motives and the many, many bad choices I was still making as a teenager, this guy, Brad, honored me. And he said, Joel, I see gold inside of you. And that was one of the many, many moments where people have honored me, and it's allowed me to step into who God made me to be. And, we talk about big vision at Patton Church. If you've been around, you'll have heard us talk about it before. We're inviting people into family to serve Swindon. We're dreaming of 1,000 baptisms. We're dreaming of an army of young people running after Jesus. We're dreaming about making a difference to some of the social issues in our towns. We're dreaming about planting churches that plant churches. We're dreaming about playing our part in seeing Swindon come alive. But guess what we're going to need to do if we're going to do that? We're going to need to be people who honor. We're going to need to be people who see the gold that God's placed inside of people and say, that's who you are. That's how I'm going to treat you. That's who I'm going to encourage you to be. When you mess up, I'm going to say, no, you are better than this because you are that kind of a person. That something shifts when we honor. Imagine what your week could look like. Imagine what our lives could look like. If despite the times people have let us down, despite the offense we've taken, if we treated people as God sees them, not based on their mistakes. Imagine the encouragement we could be. Imagine the people we could lift up. And imagine how we could just see all kinds of people step into their calling and become the people God's made them to be. So one little shift I'd love to see us make in the new normal is that we can be people who honor.